morning. My name's Ron Kappa. I'm a docent here on the USS Hornet and stationed in Alameda. My background is retired military. I'm Navy. I was in the Navy about 22 and a half years, worked my way up from the enlisted ranks all the way up through Chief Warrant Officer. Stood all the watches in both the fire room and the engine room, qualified as an engineering officer of the watch in the engine room, and actually became the chief engineer at the very end of my career due to my boss getting very sick. So that was kind of my claim to fame after that attrition. Right now we're standing in the forward engine room on the USS Hornet. I'm standing next to number 1 main engine. The way I like to explain the engine, I usually break it up into 4 parts. I talk about the high pressure, the low pressure, the main condenser, and the reduction gears, and it kind of makes one cohesive piece of equipment, if you will, and then we'll go over to the throttle board and I'll show you how we operate it. All right, so right now I am standing next to the low pressure turbine. Kind of hard to see on the camera, but on the other side next to the bulkhead over there is the high pressure turbine. Below the low pressure is your main condenser, and behind this whole maze of turbines is the reduction gear. All right, first off, we make steam over in the fire room. We make steam in 2 different varieties, if you will. We have saturated steam, which basically is your auxiliary steam, goes out to almost all your hotel services and most of your auxiliary equipment. We also have a superheater section in the boiler that makes the main steam that comes over to the engine room that drives the turbines for the main engine as well as the generator. Steam enters into the main engine through the high pressure turbine. Again, it's kind of hard to see from here, but on the other side we have the high pressure turbine. That's 12 stages. That's where the steam that we superheated in the fire room enters into the engine. There's 12 stages that steam goes through those 12 stages. Whatever is left over is exhausted over through this crossover pipe to the low pressure turbine that I'm standing in front of. There's 2 sets of turbine blades in here, one on either side where these humps are at, and the steam will flow axially right here, and it will be put through those turbines, get all the energy and work out of that steam, and whatever's left over out of that is exhausted into the main condenser. To backtrack just a short bit, one of the reasons that we have 2 turbines on the low pressure side is because of the great drop in pressure between the high pressure turbine and the low pressure turbine. We're down to about 50 or 60 pounds at this point from the original 600 pounds that we started at in the HP. So that's one of the reasons for the 2 sets of blades in here. All right, so again, that flows actually, gets all the energy out of it, boom, goes down into the main condenser. The main condenser is right in this area right here below the low pressure turbine. It's basically a nest of about 7,000 tubes, has seawater flowing through it. The seawater is a cooling medium for that steam that's hitting it. Steam hits those cool tubes, turns into condensate, gets collected in the hot well, boom, goes over to the DA tank and is being processed for reuse. All right, on either end of the low pressure turbine here, we have the astern piping or astern steam piping. So to reverse this engine, we have another set of bucket wheels on each end of the turbine, two sets of blades right here, 2 sets of blades on the other side. When we're backing down the shaft as ordered by the bridge, the head throttle is closed and the astern throttle is opened, and all the action takes place right here. We start reversing the shaft. All right, so at the very end of this low pressure turbine and the high pressure turbine, we have shafts. They're small shafts in comparison to what actually drives the ship. But what happens is those shafts are connected to the reduction gear, which is this big gray box behind me, if you will. Now, each of these turbines is pretty powerful, as you might imagine. So they put out tremendous force and tremendous RPMs. High pressure turbine, about 5,000 RPMs. The low pressure turbine is about 3,500, 4,000 RPM. While those numbers sound great, they're not useful. That's raw power. We can't contain that. And besides that, we have a shaft coming out of each of the turbines. That doesn't work if you think about it mathematically. We have 4 shafts at the end of the ship. How do we get down to that? Well, that's another thing the reduction gear does. The reduction gear takes the input from the 2 shafts I just mentioned on the high pressure and the low pressure turbine, basically synchronizes it, if you will, puts it through the reduction process, and it comes out the back end of the reduction gear as a single shaft, which actually in this case runs about 258 feet all the way to the back of the ship. That is reduced down to a usable RPM of 262 RPM in World War II configuration. All right, so that's how we keep everything under control, get things down, and get usable work out of our turbines and our steam. All right, right now I'm standing in front of the throttle board for #1 main engine. There's a whole big array of gauges right here, and I'll explain them as we go along. First thing I'm going to do is kind of cut the board in half, and then we'll talk about them in segments. So I'm going to cut the board in half right here. Everything this direction is pretty much about the main engine. This is for another watch standard, and I'll talk about that as we go along. Right here I have a picture of our pilot house. So what this is showing you right here is the helm and the lee helm. This is where the engine orders come down to the engine room as directed by the bridge. This is just a blow up of the engine order telegraph. Now the way this thing relates to the gauges you're looking at down here, engine order telegraph relates to these three guys right here. Your RPM indicator relates to this guy right here. So what I'm going to do is give you a little rough scenario of what we're going on, what's happening down here as a throttleman and maybe the supervisor of the watch. Again, these are all about #1 main engine, these gauges, with the exception of a few up here. So what will happen, let's just say for example, we're doing 5 knots heading in that direction. So right now the RPM or the engine order telegraph will be pointing at 1/3. Standard speed increments are in 5 knot segments, if you will. So 5, 10, 15, 20, and so forth, if you will. All right, so again, just imagine we're doing a 1/3 ahead. So now we're going to get a bell for the bridge. That's going to sound something like this, only much louder. And that's going to get our attention, the throttleman, the supervisor, EL. We're all going to start looking this direction. So what's going to happen, the bridge is going to get an order, we're going to get a bell, let's say for 17 knots, we got to beat a tanker. So what's going to happen, the bell that I just demonstrated, this picture is better, this is going to get cranked forward. So that what's going to happen up there, the lee helmsman is going to ring this forward, bring it back, bring it forward again, and he's going to bring this handle over to standard. I don't know how easy it is for you to tell, but there's an arrow right there. So that arrow is going to be pointing at standard this way. As we come over here and read the bell as being ordered, we're going to answer it back. Now this is going to be very hard to see, so I'm going to ask you to trust me on this. The small gauge, if you could see it, right here will go from 1/3 to standard. All right, so when that happens over here, you'll see this inside arrow come over to standard as well, because we've answered it. Now those two are pointing at each other. Now I said 17 knots, so that's not a standard speed increment, but normally we will get an RPM indicator anyway for all bells. So we're going to get a bell up here. I'm just going to throw a number up here just to signify. I threw a 116 up here, so that's going to come down from the bridge. They're going to order us 116 RPMs, and that theoretically is going to indicate a 17 knot bell. That's going to appear on the top of the RPM indicator. You'll answer it the way I just demonstrated the number. Again, those two numbers will match, so they'll know we got that part of it. So the 116 that they sent from the bridge to the engine room has been responded to. Boom, we responded to the standard bell, so everything is matching. The bridge now knows we got the bell, we understand the bell, and we're in the process of answering the bell all in the same breath, all by telegraph and no verbal commands. While all that rigmarole is going on, the throttleman is opening up his head throttle, watching his RPM indicator, bringing this guy around to 116 RPM, and he will hold that bell until the next ordered speed comes down. Okay, I'm standing in front of the other half of the gauge board I was talking about earlier. This section right here is all about the engineering officer of the watch, or what we call the EL. Right above it, we have the main engine guardian valve. This is what is allowing steam to our turbines. So that's a key factor, and that comes in during the warming up process. Getting back to this set of gauges right here, this gives the engineering officer of the watch and the supervisor in the engine room eyes on the rest of the plant. This, again, is designed primarily for the EL, or the engineering officer of the watch, for the main pieces of equipment for the whole engineering plant while we're out at sea or underway operating. Above, we have all the four-strap blowers. On either side of that, we have the alarms for each of the firearms forward and aft. We have the boiler pressures, we have pump pressures, we have oil pressures, the whole 9 yards, plus the alarms to go with it. These are all tools for the engineer and officer of the watch to make sure that the plant is doing what it's supposed to be doing for any given order sent down by the bridge. So this is basically how we get the ship to move, or what we call getting underway. Very, very condensed, but you get the general idea. Should you come out here onto the Hornet and come on one of the engineering tours, you'll see all this that I've explained, plus all the rest of the stuff behind that that contribute or assist in keeping this ship moving in its direction.